All right, a few reflections on the connection between Parshas Vaeschanan and the Haftarah this week, Nachamu. All right, to understand a little bit, why it always works out that way. That Parshas Vaeschanan is always the Torah reading of the week that we call Shabbos Nachamu, the big Shabbos of consolation. God clearly calls out to us to be consoled. There's a certain simcha that we have this Shabbos, that we are confident that one day we will be consoled and the Beis Rosh will be rebuilt. Chazal say that HaKadosh Baruch Hu, consoled us doubly. Nachamu, Nachamu, Ami, be consoled my nation. Because even though right, Laksa Kifam Chazal, we got hit double for all our sins. So also God consoles us doubly. It's a concept of a doubleness in the consolation. Right? It's something which needs to be understood. Which by the way has to do with Shabbos, that Chazal write, there in the Psikta and also elsewhere, that Shabbos has a doubleness to it. Shnei kvasim b'nei shana tmimim, right? So you bring the korban is double. You bring, two sheep. Not just one sheep. 2 sheep for the korban musaf. Shnei esram soles, 2 measures of fine flour, right? And it's also zachar v'shamar. The commandment to keep Shabbos was said in 2 different ways, miraculously simultaneously in the 10 commandments. Zachar in Parshas Yisro and shamar in this week's parsha, right? So there's this doubleness to Shabbos. There's a doubleness to the consolation. That's about Shabbos Nachamu. The Shabbos of consolation is a doubleness to Shabbos. There's a doubleness to the consolation, and we have to see how this is all reflected by Parshas Vaeschanan. We have to understand what the concept of the doubleness is. What is the concept of kefel, double, kiflayim, right? I'm sure there's one very obvious association between Parshas Vaeschanan and Nachamu and being consoled. Is the fact that the parsha opens up with Moshe Rabbeinu saying, "I daven to Hashem," I begged him to go into Eretz Yisrael. He said the Chazal say davened as many tefillos as is the Gemacha Vaeschanan, which is a lot. So the Medrash takes the opportunity, the Medrash in this week's parsha, to start darshaning on Hilchos Tefillah and darshaning all about Tefillah. Moshe Rabbeinu says he davened. So the Medrash starts talking about Tefillah in general. And that's already one nechama. That's already one consolation right there. Right? Because we know in the Shalma Parms Vaseinu, we pay for all the bulls that we can't sacrifice. Right? Because we don't have a temple, we pay with it with our lips. Right? Our tefillah is instead of the karbonis. So right, that's one consolation, that God didn't spurn us totally, because even though He denies us access to giving the karbonis, to doing the sacrifices, we have tefillah instead, and we know Chazal instituted that we daven, shachris and mincha, parallel to the korban tamid that was twice a day, and we had marav connected how the organs were burnt through the night, right? That and we have tefillas musaf to compensate for the korban musaf, right? We have tefillah instead, and that's a consolation that we're still connected to God, and He still loves us, and He accepts our tefillah instead of the korban, and that's what can give us confidence that one day the temple will be rebuilt, because God hasn't spurned us totally, and He gave us a replacement for the korbanos. That's one connection. But to get to the doubleness, right? In this week's parsha is a whole nother account of the 10 commandments, which Chazal say discrepancies between how the 10 commandments, Yasser Dibros, are said in Parshas Yisro, and how they are said in Parshas Vaeschanan, this week's parsha. They were all said b'dibur echad. They were said simultaneously in what utterance? And that's what Chazal darshan pasuk. Achas diber elokim shnayim zu shemati. God spoke once, but I heard 2 things. That refers to the 10 commandments. Right, that God, said everything in what utterance, but we heard 2 of it. We heard both Zachar and Shamar. right? We heard, Shabbos being expressed as being a day that we could just relate to in thought. We could remember it, and we share God's reality that we rest like He rested. And we also heard several times through the message of Shabbos, the way it's expressed in the version of the Ten Commandments of this week's parsha, where it doesn't say remember the Shabbos, it says guard the Shabbos, meaning, keeping Shabbos is a lot more work than it used to be. It's something that has to be guarded and protected. We're not so naturally in sync with the Shabbos like it used to be. And in this week's parsha, we don't say you share God's reality, so you're like God's children, that you should rest just like He rested. That's the way Shabbos is spoken about in Parshas Yisro. And this week's parsha says you were slaves in Egypt, and God took you out, and therefore God commands you to rest on Shabbos, meaning you owe it to Him. He took you out of Egypt, so keep Shabbos. And that whole different aspect, as it were, a lower aspect of keeping Shabbos, we're a little bit, less connected to the reality of God, but we could still guard the Shabbos. We could still keep the Shabbos because we owe it to God for taking out of Egypt, even though we don't so much share His reality anymore like we used to before we sinned. All right, that's the doubleness. That's the secret of the doubleness. The secret of the doubleness is that, God built into the Torah two tracks, right? A track of if we're 100% worthy and we keep and we maintain our worthiness, a higher level of God, and in the same Torah, it's not a different Torah, God forbid. If it would be a different Torah, it wouldn't be a consolation. It's like a booby prize, they call it. That's not a real consolation. A booby prize is not a real consolation. In the very same Torah itself, there's a plan B if God forbid we fall from the level, right? There's a plan B, and that plan B is equally a part of the same Torah. So God came up with a way that we can always stay connected to Him, in a way that's a part of the original Torah. Right? That there's a doubleness to Torah. There's two tracks to Torah. Right? There's a track of if we're worthy, we're tzaddikim gemurim. There's a track if we fall from that and we have to get back in through the power of tshuva. Right? So we have that other track, and that's the doubleness, and that's the big consolation that God says, there's two tracks in your relationship with me. And when you fall from one, so the other one kicks in, and it's two tracks within the same relationship. It's Zachar Vaeschanan where the two aspects of keeping Shabbos were said in the exact same utterance. So it's a real consolation that we could keep the same relationship with God, right? Even though it's the same, it's different. Or I say, even though it's different, despite that, it's still the same. And that's the amazing consolation, the doubleness of the consolation. Not that God says, okay, things were bad between us, but now things will be good again. We see that even during the times that quote-unquote things were bad between us, even then we were totally connected to Him. Totally. Because we just fell to a track B within the exact same Torah. Right? That's the doubleness of Shabbos, right? The Zachar and the Shamor. And for sure, what's Ikar for us on our lower level is the Shamor, and that's what also in the prayers. The Kasuv Bahem, it was written in the Luchas, Shemiras Shabbos, the keeping of Shabbos, the guarding of Shabbos, the Chen Kasuv B'Sarsecha, B'Shamor Reis also Shabbos, the Shemiras Shabbos. It's written in this week's parsha, which is our lower relationship with the Shabbos. That's what's Ikar for us, right? Our lower level. But that was already built in originally with the giving of the Torah. Zachar v'Shamor v'Dibur Echad Nemru. They were said together. It's double. So we realize that, part of the consolation is not just from this point onwards, it'll be good again, but the doubleness of consolation that you even realize retroactively, you were always with God. You are always with Him. And that's the main consolation, that the bad is really healed, because you realize that the bad times were a part of the same framework that the good times are from. It was all from HaKadosh Baruch Hu. We were always connected to Him. We were always with Him. Right? That's the tremendous consolation. That's the doubleness of the consolation. That'll be good from now on, but we also realize that retroactively it was never bad the way we thought. We just fell to a plan B within the same Torah. That's the power of Shabbos. It's the doubleness of Shabbos. That's the doubleness of the consolation. And that's the doubleness that already was expressed in the time of giving the Torah, which is what Parshas Vaeschanan reveals. It reveals a whole nother version of the 10 Commandments that were said b'dibur echad with the version that was said in Parshas Yisrael. So this doubleness is the real consolation that will be good from now on. And even retroactively, you see, that was also good. You are always with God. God never abandoned you. You're always with God just as much, because it was just plan B within the very same Torah. Nachamu, Nachamu, Ami. Torah, Nachamu, Nachamu, Ami.